All right, students, welcome back. I hope you guys had an awesome spring break, and I hope you guys turned in your movement projects yesterday. If you haven't submitted a photograph of your movement project, I need that as soon as possible. It was due yesterday. You guys had 2 weeks to work on it. So if you just responded to the bell ringer yesterday and submitted, you didn't get points for your movement project. You need to make sure you upload a photograph or email me a photograph, and then you'll see that change in Aspire and then also on Google Classroom. All right, so we're going to talk about our new project. We are going to do a fairly large art feature first, and then I'm going to introduce your project. But be gathering ideas for your project. You are going to be doing a project that is based on abstract expressionism. So this means there's a lot of room for you to do any kind of style within this. It's going to be very abstract. I shouldn't usually be able to tell what it is that you've drawn or painted because it's more expressive, okay? We're only going to do this for a week. It is going to be due this upcoming Monday. We will have a test on all of this abstract expressionist modern stuff on Friday, so please make sure that you are taking notes. All right, so let's just jump into it then. So abstract expressionism, right? It's an American post-World War II art movement, and we're going to talk about 4 or 5 artists right now, and then I'm going to test you on all those guys on Friday, just while it's fresh in your minds. So this is the first specifically American movement to achieve worldwide influence, okay? This is a big deal. This is an American movement. It is the first really purely American movement, right? We talked about Dadaism, how, right, it kind of gained fame in New York City, but right, the artist Marcel Duchamp, he was French and he'd gotten those ideas from Swiss artists. So it's not purely American. This is a purely American abstract expressionist movement. So this is the movement that actually puts New York City at the center of the art world. Like for the whole world, you guys, New York City becomes the epicenter of art, and it remains so to this day, right? We've obviously still got some fantastic art centers throughout the world, like Paris, that was the former center of the art world, but now it is New York City, and it's all thanks to abstract expressionism. So, as a style, there's a lot of different ways that artists approach abstract expressionism. Some artists don't like that they're called abstract expressionists. That's just how art historians put them all together in a group. But they have very diverse styles, like it says in the last PowerPoint point right there, right? There's different techniques that they use that we'll talk about. And they emphasize really the artist's liberty to convey attitudes and emotions through non-traditional and usually non-representational means. Now, what in the world does non-representational mean? We've talked about representational art. When I say, oh, let's draw a landscape. We're going to look out at a seascape. We're going to have some boats. When I draw the boat, it is representational. I can tell it's a boat because it looks like a boat. Now, when I say it's non-representational. We kind of talked about this with Kandinsky, right? How perhaps he's assigning meaning to a shape. Maybe I just draw a triangle in the middle of my canvas and I say that represents a boat. But looking at it, I would say that's a triangle, right? I wouldn't say that that's a boat. So non-representational means it's very abstract. You can't really tell what it is without an artist's statement. So just keep that in mind, right? You are going to be creating abstract art for this project, and your title or your artist statement that I'm going to have you write, like a little paragraph that goes with your art project, that's going to tell me what you painted, right? Whether you got inspiration from a landscape, right? Or looked out at some boats, or maybe you looked at the Nike logo, right? And you reassimilated it and made it abstract so I can't tell it's the Nike logo, but that's what inspired you. So just keep those in mind, right? In your minds. It's non-representational. And we'll show you some examples. So the first artist we're going to talk about is Jackson Pollock. Hopefully you guys have heard his name before. He is very famous. He's kind of very much part of this. He is an influential American painter, and he focuses majorly on abstract expressionist, and he's a really big part of this movement. So during his lifetime, Pollock actually enjoyed a lot of fame and notoriety. He had a whole studio, he had a lot of apprentices working for him that would help him with his famous drip paintings. Sometimes he would stand up on a ladder and drip downward. Sometimes, right, you can see that he's smoking in his little photograph there. Sometimes he would just snub out his cigarette on the canvas, and he'd leave the cigarette butt in there. Sometimes you can find broken glass in some of his paintings, and sometimes he would drink while he also painted. Needless to say, he had a very volatile personality. Sometimes he would get really angry, sometimes he was very generous. It just wasn't very consistent. And he is regarded as a very mostly reclusive artist. He had this volatile personality, and he did struggle with alcoholism all of his life, which was very unfortunate. He did die at the age of 44 in an alcohol-related single car crash. So we have no idea what he would have gone on to make, right? He was so famous by the time he was 44. It's a real shame that, he didn't continue to make artwork, that he died in that car crash. So in October of 1945, Pollock actually marries another important American painter. Her name is Lee Krasner, and in November they move to what is now known as the Pollock-Krasner House and Studio in Springs on Long Island, New York. You can still go to their studio, though both of them are not alive, right? And you can see their little studio that they worked in. There is splatter paint everywhere. It coats the floor. Peggy Guggenheim actually loaned them the down payment for the wood frame house, which was, with a nearby barn that Pollock made into a studio. Peggy Guggenheim is like the founder of the Guggenheim Museum that's in New York City, so pretty big name. So he had the fancy connections, right? And that's typically how artists get famous. It's by who you know, right? That's how a lot of success works in life. It's your connections. It's who you know. So it's there at that barn that he perfects the technique of working spontaneously with liquid paint. Okay, so he's mostly using acrylic-based paint, which is a water-based paint. He will water it down, sometimes adding other chemicals and things like that to allow this kind of really, it's not thick, right? It's really loose. It's very watery paint that allows it to drip really well. So I apologize for the quality of this painting. I have some other good ones, but I want you to know this one, right? If I were to show you a splatter painting, you would know that the artist is who, class? Jackson Pollock, right? Jackson Pollock, good. So this is Jackson Pollock's painting. Oh, what a good expressive title, right? Painting, 1948. We'll talk about some other artists today that have more expressive titles and are slightly more representational. He is really just experimenting with paint for the sake of paint. He's not necessarily saying, oh, this is to represent the destruction of humanity and the environment, right? No, he's not necessarily doing that. In some pieces, they are a little bit more focused in that way, but they're still very abstract, right? But for the most part, he, as well as color field artists that we'll talk about in just a moment here, they're expressing just by the paint itself, right? Putting human emotion into the splatters, into the paint, not necessarily trying to make it look like something. It is non-representational. What is it, class? Non-representational. Good. Here's another one. Right? And these layers of paint are so thick. Oh my goodness. And some of these are huge, huge, huge. They would take up the whole wall of my classroom, or longer even in some cases. And a lot of people say, right, this is where I often hear students, you know what, my little kid brother could do that. But they could not, right? There's been studies by forensics teams and by scientists, and they've tried to recreate like the different brush strokes, or the splatter strokes, if you will, of Jackson Pollock, and it's impossible to recreate it. There's been a lot of fraudulent artists that try to do copies and sell them as Jackson Pollocks, and it's impossible to recreate it perfectly. Now, if you have paints at home, please ask your parents first if you can use them to do a Jackson Pollock painting. Please try not to make a mess. If we were in the classroom together, we would do a Jackson Pollock splatter painting. But alas, right, we are not together. And I mean, I hope to see you before the end of the year. I'm crossing my fingers. I'll see you on May 4th, but we will see with this whole coronavirus thing. Here is another one. So, right, just a variety of different things. In this one, there's some different mark making. It's not just the splatter. We see some lines right here as if he's just touched like a roller paintbrush onto the piece. But let's talk about his techniques. So he does paint pouring. Like I said, he would climb up on a ladder, get a big bucket of paint, and just pour it down onto the canvas. Sometimes he would drip it. Sometimes he would use hardened brushes or basting syringes as paint brushes, right? So he's like squirting it out of these basting syringes. Sometimes just adding little touches here and there with a hardened brush. He would fling the paint, splatter the paint. So this is a messy, messy process. Oftentimes there would be sand. He would add sand and broken glass to his paintings. And like I said, sometimes you can find a cigarette butt in the painting, but very thick layers, super, super thick layers. And he wouldn't have like a stretched canvas. It would be like a roll of canvas, and then later, after he did the whole painting and it dried, or was semi-dry, he would stretch it over a canvas to be hung. Okay, so that's Jackson Pollock. This is one of the styles you could adapt if you want to just express your frustrations at the coronavirus onto canvas. You are welcome to do that for this project. We're going to talk about the next artist is Willem de Kooning. So not Willem, it's Willem, like a V. Willem de Kooning, so he's born in the Netherlands. Where is he born? Class, the Netherlands, good. He's an action or an abstract expressionist. We still are putting him in with the abstract expressionists like Jackson Pollock. He enters the United States actually as a stowaway on a British freighter, the SS Shelley, and comes to Virginia, to Newport News. He's not totally abstract. Some of his pieces, you can clearly tell it's a human figure because that was what his background was in, was very traditional figural art, right? Figural art is drawing people. And he loves the human figure so much that he actually can't get all the way away from that. He can't be a purely abstract expressionist because it still has the human figure in it, which is representational, right? But a true abstract expressionist is non-representational. So he's kind of in between. As you can see here, right? Like, it's not the prettiest person, but you can still tell that is supposed to be some type of person, right? Even though they have, like, this crazy cat face going on. So this is Willem de Kooning's Woman and Bicycle, 1952 to 1953. See, and that helps us to understand the painting more. By looking and reading the title of this abstract expressionist piece, we can understand the context. I can clearly tell it's a woman, right, from various curves, etc. I can't tell that there's a bicycle until I read the title, then I look down, and I might see the outline of a wheel kind of right here, right? I can see her feet a little bit more here, right? Head, obviously, eyes are super recognizable along with nose, mouth, maybe necklace here, bosom, body, etc. This is one that you should know for the test. I'm going to put this on the test. I'm going to say, who's the artist? You're going to say Willem de Kooning. I'm going to say, what's the title? You're going to say Woman and Bicycle. And the date is what class? 1952 to 1953. Here are some of his other works. So like if you have an old newspaper at home, you could paint on that. These ones are obviously this one's a lot more abstract, but there are some like various curves that would indicate perhaps a human body. This one, I'll be honest, I think Willem de Kooning's paintings are a little creepy, especially in the eyes, right? And these are like very mannish shoulders, even though this is clearly supposed to be a woman with this kind of bodice, right? This V-neck thing happening, but very loose, right? Very watered down paint. You can see some streaks and things like that where the paint is running. So this is another style. If you want to do a figure, a person, something, right, an animal, you could do an animal in this style. It doesn't have to be perfect. That's what's nice about this project, is it's more about exploring and more about expressing. Okay, we're going to move on to our next artist. So she's not necessarily an abstract expressionist, though we group her together in the same area because she's creating artwork at the same time as these artists and getting a lot of inspiration from people like Jackson Pollock and Willem de Kooning. So we're going to talk about color field art. So this is different than abstract expressionism. So color field painting is a style of abstract painting that emerges in New York during the 1940s and 50s, so the exact same time frame. It is closely related to abstract expressionism, with a lot of its more, important early proponents being among the pioneering abstract expressionists. Color field painting is characterized primarily by large fields of flat, solid color. They spread across or stain into the canvas, creating areas of unbroken surface and flat picture plane. So there's a lot less emphasis placed on gesture with this, brushstrokes and action, and more emphasis placed on overall consistency, form, and process. With color field, it is literally all about the color. It is about nothing else. It is not about gesture. It is not about splattering the paint like it was for Jackson Pollock. It is purely what is the effect of putting these colors together. Is it therapeutic? Is it not? And it's just for the sake of exploration. It is not for expressing the inner turmoil of students during the coronavirus, right? Even though you have that, it is for the sake of exploration. So let's talk about our first color field artist. We're actually only going to talk about one. So the main proponent of color field study is Helen Frankenthaler. What's her name, class? Helen Frankenthaler. Good. So she is described as an American post-painterly artist. What was that? A post-painterly artist, born in New York City, right? New York City, this is when time has come for New York City to be the epicenter of all artwork. She's very influenced by the work of Pollock, by Clement Greenberg, who's another prominent artist. Her career was launched in 1952 with the exhibition of Mountains and Sea, which we will see. The painting's very large, measuring 7 feet by 10 feet. So these are huge paintings, and has the effect of a watercolor, though it is actually painted in oils. So in it, she actually introduces the technique of painting directly onto an unprepared canvas so that the material absorbs the colors. This is the first time we really see this happening for at least a famous painter. She heavily dilutes the oil paint with turpentine or kerosene so that the color would soak into the canvas. Okay, so we're trying to get the color to soak into the canvas. What are we trying to do? Get the color to soak into the canvas. This technique is known as soak stain. What's it known as? Soak stain. Good. That will be on your test. This was adopted by a lot of other artists and launched the second generation of color field school in painting. And the method actually leaves this kind of halo effect on the canvas around each area to which the paint's applied. So with Frankenthaler, we will see this in some of her pieces. But this is just, this is attributed to her. She is the creator of the halo effect and the soak stain. So this style was characterized by large areas of a more or less flat single color. So color field artists set themselves apart from abstract expressionists because they eliminate the emotional, mythic, or the religious content and the highly personal and gestural painterly application. Like I said, abstract expressionist, it might represent something deeper, right? There is some emotion, some connection to the painting. They're expressing some kind of feeling. But with color fields, especially with Helen Frankenthaler, there is no, deeper motive. It is just to see what the effect of the soak stain with these colors will render. There is no symbolism. There's no symbolism or representation beyond that. Okay. So here's one of her pieces, Helen Frankenthaler, Wales, 1966. Large planes of single colors, right? You're like, what? This is so boring. But she's really just trying to experiment with the soak stain, right? I could kind of see the stain happening, this halo-y kind of effect down here. Here's some more of her earlier work. You're like, what? This is a very simple style. It's true. It's a simple style. And you know what? To each their own. We respect all art, right? Again, seeing how these two different colors come together and how they bleed into one another. That's what she's experimenting with, right? I can't believe how expensive these paintings are for how simple they are. But you know what? She added a lot to the art market. Even though this is not my personal favorite style, I can appreciate what she did for color fields, okay? Okay, we're going to talk about Mark Rothko. And again, you can do a color field project if you want. You just have to give it an interesting title, right? Like whales. Like, do you see a whale in here? Do you see Wales, the country? No, you do not. So again, it's all about abstract expressionism, color field art, and going into your title is important. Okay, let's talk about Mark Rothko. So he is a Latvian-born American painter and printmaker. He is classified as an abstract expressionist, but he himself rejects this label. So I might say on the test, who rejected the label of abstract expressionist? And you would respond with, what class? Mark Rothko. Perfect. He even resists this classification as an abstract painter. So he himself will call himself an abstract painter more than an abstract expressionist, okay? So it's while he visits a friend at the Art Students League of New York City that he witnesses students sketching a model. And according to Rothko, this is the beginning of his life as an artist. So let's see his style. Again, very much a color field artist. Even though we classify him as an abstract expressionist because sometimes it's more about the gestures of the paintbrushes within here, but he is using large fields of color. So I don't know why we don't classify him as a color field artist, but it's because he has deeper intent, right? He has some symbolism sometimes in his artwork. And they're huge, right? Like, look at this girl next to these paintings. Very simple, but you can see this kind of bleeding, halo-y kind of effect on the edges. It's all about these brush strokes. It's about this effect of the colors next to each other, about color theory. He was commissioned to do this interesting chapel, and he just did all these black pieces that go into this chapel. I'm not sure what kind of denomination this church is supposed to be, but very interesting, right? Like, look how big. It's like just a black canvas. That's what it seems like, right? But you get up close and there are subtle differences. Oh, we won't be doing this today, but here are some other ones. This is not him. This is a different artist. Okay, we have one more artist. Oh, we have multiple. Let me see. Oh, I skipped it. I forgot. I was going to make these red instead of purple. I don't really like this color. We also have Ramar Bearden. So he is an African-American artist and writer. And he's not an abstract expressionist, okay? We'll talk about what he is. So he worked in several mediums, including cartoons, oils, and collage. He's actually a person that puts collage on the map. He makes collage a fine art medium. He was born in North Carolina. He attended DeWitt Clinton High School in the Bronx and completed his studies at New York University and graduated with a degree in education, so he wanted to become a teacher. And his education was actually interrupted by sketches of time he spent as a professional baseball player in what was then called the Negro Leagues. So he has a very wide range of abilities. He published a lot of articles on topics and created political cartoons. So we've talked about our abstract expressionists, right? They're very abstract. This whole unit right now is, let me go back, is again post World War II art up until we talk about our architecture unit, which will start next week, or the week after that. So we're just kind of talking about post World War II artists right now. So we've talked about abstract expressionists, we've talked about color fields, and now we're going to talk about kind of the Harlem Renaissance artists, right? So those are primarily Black Americans and dealing with, color in the U.S. at this time. So let's talk about this. So he designed a lot of costumes for dance and theater. So he does everything, right? He's not just a painter. He's a collage artist. He writes books. He creates costumes. It's amazing. And he also was offered this opportunity to play professional baseball for Philadelphia Athletics. This is unfortunate, but he was offered this if he would agree to pass as white. Which is kind of like an offensive offer, right? Like, oh, you can play on our baseball team if you, because he was very light-skinned for an African-American. They were like, if you can pass as white, you'll be able to play. And he refused that, right? Because he knew that wasn't who he was. And you shouldn't be ashamed of, the color of your skin or where you come from, even though this was a very difficult time back in the 1960s, right, to say that. So during the 1960s civil rights movement, his focus shifts again, this time to collage, right? Ripping up papers, newspapers, etc., and pasting them together to create something new. So after helping to found an artist group in support of civil rights, Bearden's work became more representational and more overtly socially conscious. So in 1964, he held an exhibition he called Projections, where he introduced his new collage style. These works were very well received and were exhibited the following year at the Corcoran Gallery of Art in Washington, D.C., and he would continue to work with variations of collage until he died, and these are generally considered to be his best works. So he's part of this Harlem Renaissance, right? Bringing awareness to the plight of the African American. This should be in red, so you should know this one. Write this one down. Ramar Bearden, Sheba, 1970, collage on paper. So talking about just past, right? You see a lot of nodding to African American culture, but not just that, but African culture, right? Going back to heritage for a lot of these African American people. We're not going to do this. Disregard this activity, but here's like a sketch, right? So again, very abstract. These are not These don't look like how people look in real life, right? He's choosing a specific style, um, very specific style. But so the project that we're doing this week, I was gearing it more towards, abstract expressionism. But if you want to choose a political topic and pick a style that's a little more abstract and render it, go for it. I would love to see that. Okay, we have one more artist. We can do this. So Jacob Lawrence. So he is among the best-known 20th century African-American painters. Only in his 20s, when his Migration series made him nationally famous, the series of paintings was featured in a 1941 issue of Fortune magazine. The series depicted the epic Great Migration of African Americans from the rural South to the urban North, right? So from farmland into city, right? Rural to urban. He is part of this Harlem Renaissance and the modern art trend, so very similar to Bearden. Born in 1917 in Atlantic City, New Jersey, Lawrence was 13 when he moved with his mother, sister, and brother to NYC. His mother enrolled him in classes at an arts and crafts settlement house in Harlem, and in an effort to keep him busy, the young Lawrence often drew patterns with crayons. Although much of his work copied his mother's carpets and style, right, an art teacher then noticed the great potential in Lawrence. So let's look at some of these. So again, this is a very political type topic, right? Migration series, this depiction of African Americans moving from rural to urban to find work. Okay, so Jacob Lawrence, panel 1 from the Migration of the Negro series, 1940 to 1941. This is what he titled it, right? And he does this in a tempera on hardboard. So very flat, right? Lots of very flat two-dimensional colors. These people don't look three-dimensional. You can't even see individual details of faces, but maybe that is symbolic, right? Perhaps he's adding some symbolism there. Again, this migration, just like birds migrate, right? So too are the African American people migrating to find work and opportunity. Here's another one. This is like Roe versus Wade or something, some judge scene. But again, right, seeing this white judge, two African American men, perhaps, defending themselves, being prosecuted, etc. And it's in a very comical kind of style, right? It's very cartoony feeling. So, like, he doesn't have this most advanced or representational style. He is still it's slightly modern, abstract, but still dealing with these very heavy topics, right? All right. So that concludes it for this art feature. You do need to know all these artists. I'm going to test you on all of them on Friday. So please, please, please make sure that you study, have your notes, etc. You're welcome to use your notes on the tests. I can't do anything about you not testing with them for now. So just go ahead and use those. Let me go outward because we've got a lot of different styles here. So here's our project outline. So this is going to be due April 20th, right? So this upcoming Monday. You don't need to spend too much time. We'll spend, Wednesday, Thursday, working on your projects. Friday, you'll have the weekend. It'll be due Monday. You can select anything, person, place, thing. You could pick something more political if you wanted to go with more of the Harlem Renaissance style. But I want you to draw or paint it in one of the styles of either the abstract expressionists. Let me alter this here. It can be an abstract expressionist, color field, or Harlem Renaissance. Okay. So this may mean that if you're choosing like an abstract expressionist topic, right, and you're trying to do it like a Jackson Pollock, how am I going to tell what that is? Your title is going to have to tell me about the piece, or you can write a brief paragraph about what the piece is supposed to be representing, whether that is emotional or whether that is something you looked at and then tried to make more abstract, right? Abstraction equals what, class? Simplification. So you can do this in any medium, on any paper, right? As simple as printer paper and a pen, even if that's all you have. I would prefer it if you could use some color. Like, even if you have highlighters or colored pencils or crayons, that's wonderful. We are using whatever you have at home. If you have paint, please go ahead and experiment with paint. However much experimentation you can do with this would be wonderful, because that's what this movement is all about, right? It is about breaking boundaries. Sometimes it's non-representational. Other people like Willem de Kooning, you can still tell it's a person, but it's a little weird, it's a little abstract. That is this project. So you should spend probably about an hour and a half to 2 hours throughout this week and over the weekend working on the project. Turn it in on Monday, right? I'm obviously grading very nicely, so don't worry too much. But let me know if you have any questions. You must submit a photograph either through Google Classroom or you email it to me on Monday, okay? If you haven't submitted a photograph of your project from pop art or movement, I need those to be sent to me as soon as possible. If the deadline's already passed, just email them to me. Don't just upload them to Google Classroom. It's just kind of hard to keep track of. So preferably email it to me if it is past its due date. But this abstract expressionist project will be due this upcoming Monday, test on Friday. If you have any questions, please feel free to comment in the student comments below, email me, or I have my office hours every day from 1 to 3. If you have a question, would like to talk face to face, just pop me an email. I can send you a Zoom or a Google Hangout invitation and we can talk. So yeah, talk about anything. Projects, if you need extra things to do while you're at home, I am happy to provide that for you. Okay. So again, any medium, you're just picking something, person, place, thing, political topic, if you want, and just do it in one of the styles of the artists we've talked about. You could even do a collage if you wanted to do like a Ramar Bearden kind of thing. All right, that concludes it for today. Please let me know if you have any questions, and stay safe out there. Miss you guys. Bye.